Fox, Peppy, Falco, and Slippy were back. Never minding that last bit of unfortunate news, the bulletin that the Star Fox license was barrel-rolling its way onto Nintendo's newfangled 64-bit console was the announcement the fans were waiting for. The SNES space shooter had pushed console hardware to its limits with 3D acceleration, and Star Fox 2 had been the anticipated inevitability of the original's success. But in its final hour, the franchise that had earned the loyalty of Lylat legions throughout the galaxy was shot down in flames. Star Fox 2 was cancelled, and the mind of Miyamoto was at work. Why just release an updated enhancement of his graphical giant when the Nintendo 64 was on the outer moon's horizon? The logical stall was worth the wait, and Star Fox 64 became one of the top-selling titles in North America, surpassing its precursor in both fun and finesse. The anthropomorphic aviators were not the only ones to return. Andross, the outer space ape, was again bent on taking over the Lylat system. You know, for a villainous archetype, he really seems to set the bar low for himself. Like the first Star Fox, the onus fell upon your team of Thunderbird-style troop of galactic pilots to right all wrongs in your celestial corner of the galaxy and keep Corneria, essentially the Earth of this universe, free from Andross's iron grip. Which is a big deal, seeing as it's all the deranged monkey has. The attractive part of the plot was that developer Nintendo EAD had placed greater emphasis on character roles in your mission. Instead of just kind of tagging along, you actually felt the impact of your teammates' presence in the combat arena, and not just in terms of firepower. Admittedly, half the time you were just covering their ass.
Thanks, Fox. I thought they had me.
But even the grossly goofy Slippy the Toad had his merit. The tech junkie would assess an enemy boss's weak points, and if he or any of your other wingmen took too much damage, they'd be out of commission. Rob announcing their ship was under maintenance. Rob 64. Yeah, get this. Nintendo's stupid promotional ploy had stooped to tagging even their characters with the number 64. Now that is pathetic. Anyway, the point here is that keeping your pals in one piece instead of just going it alone was backed by incentive. Having everyone survive a mission was also a motivating duty as the characters felt more fleshed out and balanced. The addition of some quality voiceover obviously didn't hurt to that end. They all had their own persona. Peppy's wisdom as an aging veteran pilot, Falco's cocky efforts to constantly show Fox up, and Slippy's, well, I mean, Slippy was just an idiot. Can you believe there's actually an entire level devoted to rescuing this useless amphibian? In any case, all of these characters now felt personalized and part of a team, and it made your venture into the throngs of Venom so much less lonely. Even Fox's backstory was broadened a bit, as it turned out that Andross was behind the death of his father.
Know that I control the galaxy.
Yeah, the Star Wars salute never seems to cease with the series. Essentially, the game played like it did on the Super Nintendo. You had to travel across a map screen, flying through about a dozen stages in a few hours that varied from asteroid belts and space stations to besieged cities and barren deserts. Unlike before, though, the more difficult route to the finish line at Venom wasn't available from the get-go. Your success rate from mission to mission determined which parts of the sector you'd scour. It was a tweak that genuinely gave the game a really enticing and challenging edge. You'd play the game for years in your youth, stuck to sticking with the low road as a novice, only to remember later in life that there was actually still half a game for you to tackle, all because you had never been good enough as a tyke to unlock it. The core space shooter gameplay was phenomenally better this time around, mainly thanks to responsive control that was leaps and bounds better than it had been in its first outing. A more concrete training regimen laid out all of the controls and functions effectively instead of just having you fly through a bunch of arches and rings. It gave you a real feel for your starfighter. The R-Wing could veer, pull a somersault to get a drop on the baddies behind you, and of course to shake off enemy fire.
Do a barrel roll!
But you could also pull a U-turn. New to the series was the all-range mode, which would let you fly around about a block or two of spatial area, giving the game's flight action some welcome variety. The mode was only available for certain areas and scripted sequences, mainly bosses and the like, but it was such an awesome diversion from the usual rail shooter routine, providing a very different dynamic from just looking ahead and pulling the trigger. Variety was the key here. Some levels even let Fox get out of the R-Wing cockpit and command vehicles on land and sea, vehicles like tanks and and submarines breaking up the aerial pace. Other gameplay additions like the ability to charge your main laser and lock onto hostiles made this one of the tightest and most thrilling space shooters, let alone 3D space shooters, in existence, and the definitive title for armies of Star Wars fans itching to simulate their series' epic X-Wing battles. Remember, though Lucas's prequel trilogy later ushered in a wave of great Star Wars space shooter games in the 2000s, Star Fox was at the time the closest thing any sucker for sci-fi shoot-'em-up had to enjoy outside of the movies. And boy, did it satisfy. Star Fox had introduced 3D acceleration in what was arguably more of a technical display than a piece of entertainment. But Star Fox 64? Wow. While naturally not having the same sort of impact the first game had, as the gaming world was already in full swing with the 3D era, its graphics and sound undeniably blew the bland baseness of the original's texture-absent terrain and objects out of the water. Again, Miyamoto made the right move waiting it out for the next generational hardware. Intelligent level design had you maneuver through arches, chasms, and corridors, and the world was rich with detail. Though, if there's one knock against Star Fox 64's graphics, it's that you just have to laugh at the animations on your squad mates when they pop up at the bottom of the screen. But what are they? They look like sock puppets. But the deal breaker was that the game was one of the first to feature Rumble support, which, take it from me, was a big deal back then. I mean, I still vividly remember the first time I popped that big hulking massive extension into the back of my 64 controller. Being able to actually feel the tremors of a virtual explosion on the screen was mind-blowing. Many a sleepless night have been spent on the sequel to the Super FX's stellar showcase. Star Fox had, along with other contemporaries, pushed 3D gaming into the mainstream eye only years earlier, and if Star Fox 64 wasn't as important to that shifting scene, it would certainly find refuge in the fact that it was a much more solid space shooter. To those who haven't had the pleasure of blowing Slippy the Toad's StarCraft to pieces, don't let the short story throw you off, because a slew of sublime gameplay grafts, immersive graphics and sound, and appreciated multiplayer mode and Rumble option make this, still 15 years later, easily one of the finest in its class, and the paramount product of addictive arcade action.
Don't relax. We're not done yet.